Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Canadian session of the day, Crossing the Border U.S. Visas for Canadian Immigration Professionals. As cross border business and mobility continue to grow, Canadian immigration professionals are eager to learn more about U.S. visa options for their clients. This session will help you with this. To go over this topic, we're glad to welcome Véronique Malka, founder and managing lawyer of Canadian Law Group LLC, established in 2005, which has since become a trusted resource for lawyers and businesses navigating U.S. immigration from Canada and beyond. As a pioneer in cross border immigration law, Veronique brings nearly decades of experience navigating both Canadian and U.S. immigration systems. She is admitted to the bar of Massachusetts and Ontario and is a foreign legal consultant in New York and New Jersey. Today, Veronique will share her expertise on U.S. visa pathways for Canadian professionals, including EB-2 NIWs, E2s, trade agreements, and other business immigration options. She'll also provide key insights into how the new administration is shaping immigration policies, as we all know, and what that means for Canadian entrepreneurs and professionals looking to expand south of the border. Get ready for an insightful session packed with practical guidance and expert strategies with our lovely friend Veronique. Enjoy. Hi, Veronique.
Hello, Marianella. Thank you for this opportunity. It's nice to be here.
Yes, thank you for being here, Veronique. I think you're the perfect person to be here, right? You know what's happening on one side of the border, on the other side of the border. So we're really grateful that you accepted our invitation. So thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Wonderful. So let's get started with the questions. How similar or how different are the two immigration systems for the U.S. and Canada?
So, my general approach doing cross border work and answering that question often for clients is to um, look at the systems as philosophically different at first. So the Canadian system, and I should start by saying that I'm a dual citizen myself, and I have helped people apply to come to Canada and apply to come to the US. So that's a specialty of our firm. We generally will describe it as follows: Canada is more likely. Um, Canada is interested in quality of the immigrant. Whereas in the US, you might be able to say that the quantity of how much someone will invest in the US will define their approach to immigration. So, quality versus quantity. Now, that's a very general statement. Um, Breaking it down, both countries have immigration systems. The Canadian system is based on a point system for the permanent immigration route. So we're looking at the quality of the applicant. We're looking at that applicant's professional experience, their education, their ability to speak languages, and we're rating that applicant. So we're looking at the
Their
quality of
age.
the applicant.
Mhm.
The age, oh yes,
That's a
that's a
big one,
very
right?
low bar, by the way. So ideally, they want people in their 20s, maybe early 30s. After that, it starts to drop. So that's not to say that an applicant shouldn't give it a shot. You have to look at the whole picture, and it's a bit of a holistic approach. So there'll be draws, and different provinces will be pulling from the express entry pool. So it's an express entry system, and to look at which candidates will fill the provincial need at the time. Those are called targeted draws. The government controls which applicants they invite to apply for permanent residence. So again, the Canadian system is very controlled by government. They are looking and selecting their applicants, and they're looking at the quality of the applicant. So that would be the way I would characterize a permanent route into Canada. There are other routes, but generally speaking, and into the US, we're looking at visas that offer the applicant an opportunity to invest.
Mhm.
Or in the case of the H-1B, we're looking at the specialized skills of the applicant. Okay. And I would say in general that the routes into the US are much more based on an employment uh, offer. So if you want to come to the US, you're more likely to get in if you have $5 million. We'll discuss that later, or an offer of employment. Um, because there's only a small category of green cards that don't require an employment offer. Whereas in Canada, you don't have to have an offer, but you have to have the quality background to be of use to the country, if that makes sense.
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And we're talking mostly like green cards, right? Like fully. Because then when we talk about E2s, then investment, as you said,
Right,
create job creation and all those
right.
factors also come into play. But that's an interesting way to analyze the two countries, right? And it's, I mean, I've never heard it before, but I love it. It explains it very perfectly. um, and also we see in the entrepreneur programs as well by province that they also have key sectors that they also support. So it's not just you opening any random company, but it has to be in that specific sector. So it seems very selective, right? They're picking and choosing who they want to come in Canada. Yeah, that's a really nice perspective.
Thank you. Yes, that's how I see it really. And so if I have a certain type of applicant who has very unique skills, but very little to invest. And I'm talking about an applicant outside of America, outside of Canada, outside of the US. I might gear them to Canada because I'll say, they need people like you in Canada. And
Understood.
so and we might even gear them to a certain province or a certain provincial nominee program. On the other hand, in the US, unless they have a job offer, if they have nothing to invest, the chances and the options are very limited.
Exactly. And talking about the limitations, with all the things that have been changing in immigration processes in Canada, um, how are they impacting the whole business immigration industry right now?
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We are speaking second week of March. We've had threats of tariffs that have come out from the new US administration that would impact Canada and Mexico, and reversely will be impacting the US as well as the allies add tariffs as well. So we're looking into a tariff war, is what we're looking at now. When tariffs are impacted, immigration is impacted because companies are impacted by what they can bring in and how much they can bring in. Therefore, the staff is affected. So it's really, I wouldn't even say they're cousins. I would say they're siblings in terms of how those two impacts happen. So because the tariffs at the time we're speaking are still a question, and they're probably going to come in April 2nd. It's hard to answer that exactly. I do believe that lawyers have to start being very smart about how they are preparing for this next stage. So we have just under 30 days here to really stay on top of things, developments, make sure that lawyers begin to diversify their practices. That would be my best advice. To start looking at, if let's say you've been doing a lot of work permits, you want to look at what kinds of work permits now you might be able to offer that don't necessarily are not necessarily impacted by
By the tariff.
the changes that will come in. And same way into the US, if there's a major change to CUSMA or USMCA, however you want to call it, the former NAFTA, then I think it's imperative for lawyers to prepare for the unexpected. And, we're lawyers, we're trained to prepare for the worst case scenario. That's how you protect your clients, right? We
Exactly.
don't prepare for
Adapting.
the best case scenario. We're called when there's problems. So what we want to do is prepare for, I would say, a scrap completely of NAFTA. And I know people are probably jumping, but this is something real. And if that happens, you have a lot of people who are going to be impacted. You're going to get a lot of calls. You need to know how to answer those calls. You need to, okay, well, there's other visas available. We're gonna do this, or we're gonna do that. So that's important. It's on the lawyers right now, and I'm sure people attending your summit, which is very timely, are aware of this already, and that's where they're probably attending.
Exactly. A lot of people here listening to what you have to say, Veronique, for sure. Let's talk a little bit more about that, about Kuzma not being an option. What are the other alternatives? What are the alternatives for investors, and what about professionals? How does the landscape look like without the Kuzma option?
The landscape looks very scary. um, So, I've been doing this work since I myself came into the US in 2005, as you mentioned, and NAFTA. NAFTA's been around for 30 years. This is going to be a major impact to practice if it happens. So, this is where thinking outside the box is most important. So, if you have people on TNs who are working, you know that they have an offer of employment in the US. You know that that's already in place. So, to answer whether TNs would immediately be revoked, I don't think so. I think that would be a very rash and radical move from the administration that hopefully will be. There's a group of people there that will temper these kinds of decisions.
Mhm.
And they would impact US industry as well. So I don't think that Trump would do something that would hurt the US industry. I don't think, okay? And that is to be determined. But I would say that there may be a difficulty in renewing a TN since NAFTA will be, if NAFTA is scrapped, right? So how do you then come back in? So an E2 might be a possibility, and then having the conversation with the employers, with the companies, as opposed to the very concerned applicants. You might want to now say, this is something that we can discuss with your employer. Let's have a meeting with the employer, with you, and let's see what we can work on, because you may not have somebody who can invest. So maybe the employer can assist. There's the H-1B route. That could be potential, because most professionals, as under NAFTA, or I still call it NAFTA under Kuzma, have a bachelor's degree, right? There's only three categories that don't require a bachelor's degree. So most will have a bachelor's degree. So maybe there's a way to see that as a specialty occupation and put them into the next H-1B lottery. But that's something you might even want to start thinking now. We're in H-1 registration right now. So, there's still time to move by March 24th. If you have people that you think are aging out on their TNs, doesn't hurt to put them in. Put them in, because the
Exactly.
H-1 is a lottery also. So put them in. And then have that conversation also with your clients about, what their future goals were. The TN is a non-immigrant visa, renewable indefinitely. We know this, but what were they looking to do ultimately? Let's go back to the
The
drawing
main
board
objective.
and say,
Exactly.
were you looking to stay on this visa for 30 years? At some point, most people are looking, their kids get older, or they decide to build a family. It becomes a lot, take it from me, a lot harder to move when you have young children. And it's harder you kind of have to land somewhere and make that, certainly for the school year, where you live. And so that defines a lot of people's goals, and time changes, goals change. So it's time to just, I would say, have that conversation with your clients, or offer them that opportunity to express and emote about their concerns and what their plans will be.
Exactly. So basically, everybody who has a current status needs to be treated as an original applicant all over again. Where do you
Potentially.
stand? What do you want to go? What does the company want for you? What do you want for yourself? So it starts being teamwork, company, applicant, lawyer. That's where, I mean, the value and the contribution also from the immigration firm supporting both the applicant and the company come in, right? So that's
Absolutely.
very interesting. Veronique, before we go into talking about some of the U.S. visas that you're mentioning for Canadian applicants, I wanted to ask you, like, ever since the administration started, I remember I was asking you before we jumped into the session about, are people hesitating or are they moving? I mean, are they making rapid changes or are they holding off? And I think that's a big question mark, because the other day we were in Ayla and we were receiving like different comments from different people. Of course, they all have clients from different parts of the world, so it may change. But I wanted to know your opinion about what's happening.
So from our practice standpoint, what we're seeing is a lot of hesitation. So I think you're right. We're seeing a lot of people holding back. I mean, happens to be right now, again, we're second week of March. We're in a real standstill in terms of the tariffs and how that will impact immigration, especially from the business perspective. And this is a business immigration seminar. So we really need to, I think the onus is on the lawyers right now to mobilize and prepare themselves for the, I'd like to say the inevitable, but that is what we are. I can't say this enough. This is what we're trained to do. We're trained to advise our clients and help them. We're not, we shouldn't be a passive person holding back to see what's going to happen. We need to be involved. And I think we've discussed this, you and I, how do we mobilize as well as attorneys and advocates to be involved and express our concerns. And that is an important piece. We do need to be involved with our law societies, with our CBAs or Canadian Bar Associations or our AILAs. We need to be in our committees. We need to be even speaking to other colleagues, picking up a phone. There's become a foreign concept to pick up a phone, right? But it's time to have those meetings and say, hey, let's just brainstorm. What can we
Exactly.
do?
Back to basics.
Back to
Exactly.
basics. Yeah, we're back to the drawing board in many ways. Absolutely.
Veronique, and there was another thing that you were mentioning, which I found very interesting, was like how you see the approach of the new administration being that the government is currently handled more like a business than a government. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I've definitely found that that's the way it is. And because I myself handle a business, I'm familiar with the way of thinking that Trump is a businessman. There's nothing to say, nothing to change about that. That's who he is. Part of why he was elected was because he's, you know, he makes his decisions and he acts on them and he follows through. That is attractive to many people. It is really the anti-politic, because politics is a lot of think tanking and deciding and hearing and taking, and it's a lot slower, right? As of a result of getting all this stakeholder input, which is wonderful and democratic, we are able to come to plans. Canada's very big on this and very successful at gathering in the stakeholders' input before any policies are announced. But it's a slow process. And anyone who does Canadian immigration knows this. It's a very slow, painstaking process. And it's not without its faults. So everyone's looking at Trump as being I have to say, when I look at what Canada did suddenly, subitement, by lowering the target immigration thresholds for the next 3 years, this is just absolutely, it's shocking to me that Canada would do this when, on the other hand, we are the second biggest country after Russia. We need so much skilled labor. US has amazing people that they're deporting back to their countries when Canada, could have taken them in, and they're great workers. DACA visa holders, great opportunity for Canada. They're essentially like US citizens. I don't know what's happening with DACA yet. We don't know. But I think, I spoke to the consulate the Canadian consulate in New York years ago about this, and they said, great idea. We need to take the DACA visa holders into Canada. These are great candidates. So Trump is not trained in immigration. He has his team. But Canada and the US should, in my opinion, be in more of a communication discussion. It would be wonderful to have
Yes.
that conversation and have the two immigration systems talk about how they can help each other. It costs a lot of money for the US to deport people. Let's not forget.
Yes.
So, let's look at it that way. Let's say Trump, hey, you would save money if you sent these people to Canada. And Trudeau would say, really? We would hope he would say, we need these people, right? These people have been to college. DACA, visa deferred action immigrants are, to me, la crème de la crème of an applicant.
Exactly.
They're
And
so
and that's in line to the immigration system that they're wanting to live by. But do you feel the fact that that's not happening comes because Trump is looking at the government as a business, and in the meantime, Canada is moving very slow to get everybody's opinion?
as they say about marriage, it's all about good communication, right? A lack
Exactly.
of communication, we know what that does to a marriage, or poor
Exactly.
communication. Right now, the two countries, as I see it, are not communicating. And in fact, they're engaging in a tariff war. So from there comes probably a lot of negative things. We want there to be communication. So when we're talking about lobbying and advocating, this is important. In Canada, reach out to your MP if you have ideas, or in the US, reach out to your Congress people or council people, and start communicating, start advocating. And I recently wrote a letter to Secretary of State Rubio. It probably won't go anywhere, but it's out there. We can't
Yes.
sit still.
Take
We
action.
cannot sit
Agreed.
still. We have to take action, and we have to prepare, because it's not just for us, it's for our clients, and it's for the future of our practice.
Exactly. That's a great reminder because yeah, everybody's waiting to see what happens, right? And here it's let's see what we can do from our position. Let's see what we can analyze for our applicants. So that's great advice, Veronique. Thank you. Um, okay, so now let's jump in to the U.S. visa. So let's talk about some of the most popular U.S. visas for Canadians who want to open a business in the U.S. And then we can talk also. I mean, you've mentioned a few of them: E2, EB-2 NIW, Kuzma. But let's talk a little bit more about those.
Okay, just sorry about the pages turning. I'm getting to my page. There we go. So, a lot of what we see, as I said, is employment based applications of Canadians coming to the US. You have a very common one. Again, it's encapsulated in the current NAFTA treaty, leaving aside what might happen to that treaty and hoping for the best that it will stick around. I'm hoping the professional section, Appendix D of the treaty, will get updated. That's a very old and inapplicable in many ways section. But we see a lot of L1s. Okay, so intercompany transfers.
Yes.
That's still a very popular way for Canadians to come in. So that's if they have a current employer in Canada and they've been employed for 1 year or more continuously, right? From 3 years, within 3 years of the time they apply, they can apply for an L. The nice thing about the US, going into the US L, is that it's 1 year within the 3 years that you apply, but you might have had a gap year, let's say between year two and the time you apply, and you're working for somebody else. But it doesn't matter if 2 years ago you were working for that
Exactly.
company, you can still apply for the intercompany transfer, assuming you get that opportunity. So that's nice. Going into Canada, we have a difference there, which is that you have to currently be working for that transferring entity in order to do that. Okay.
Okay.
We have B1s. B1s are going to, and I would expect you'll see a big push up into B1s as treaties. The H1s are taken, the numbers might lower on the H1s. So B1s, be careful with B1s. Paper your file, write to your client, and make sure they understand that the B1 business visitor visa for Canadian is limited to 6 months. But the activities that they can do in a B1 are so limited. In
Limited.
fact, they're more limited than a business visitor entry into Canada. Okay.
Wow.
So they're not equal. The B1 in the US is more limited. It's really limited to meetings, to sales, and negotiating a contract. That doesn't take 6 months. So be cautious, because if you're going to an officer and saying, I need a B1 for 6 months, like why? What are you doing for 6 months?
Exactly. What is it that you're gonna do?
To
Exactly.
negotiate. And these days you can negotiate from afar. So I'm very cautious with B1s. I send a description of the duties allowed to my client, and I tell them, make sure that your client is going to, your traveler is going to be doing one of these particular duties,
Mhm.
because otherwise you're outside the ambit of the B1. Um,
Exactly. And then it
um,
gets tricky because that's where the questions start, and then you need to, yeah, to be careful now more than ever, right?
Absolutely. B1s are going to become the fallback. Some person doesn't get in. They want to come into the US. They want to buy a franchise. They want to be in the US. And let's say the E2 doesn't go through, or they don't have enough to invest. I guarantee you they're going to try B1 to come in and try and do, and then go back to Canada and then try it again, because a Canadian has up to 6 months on a B1. Not a good strategy. And
Mhm.
it's important for the lawyer to warn their client of that.
Exactly. So extremely limited and extremely temporary.
Yes.
So
Yes.
only if it's truly needed in a temporary nature for something specific.
Yes,
Okay.
and it goes without saying that anyone traveling for a B1 should also, a Canadian should make sure they have a return ticket, make sure that they have pay stubs that they're carrying with them, a letter from the employer saying we're allowing a short leave of absence for this person, show
Mhm.
that they have ties in Canada, strong ties in Canada, okay? So that's going to be important in a successful B1 application at the port today for Canadian.
Okay.
We have O1s. We're seeing still O1s. O1s I don't expect will be too much impacted,
Mhm.
because they're really for that outstanding professional, right?
Yes.
And so, O1s, we have everyone from Celine Dion to Justin Bieber who've come in, very hard to say no to people like that. The
Exactly.
O's that might be affected are people who are trying to fit into an O category.
Mhm.
So again, I would, prepare your clients for a higher threshold of what's an outstanding professional. Make sure your clients are findable on the internet. And I say this sincerely, because we've seen clients that have chosen, for philosophical reasons, not to have much of an online presence. And
Mhm.
that's fair, that's fair. But the problem is, if you don't have an online presence, how is the government going to know that you're outstanding? The world is now run online.
Yeah,
We're online.
definitely.
When your philosophy about life impacts your life negatively, it's time to check in. And the job of a lawyer is to say, I respect your decision philosophically, but know that it's inconsistent with you obtaining your visa. So,
Exactly.
you have to make sure your client is, and I always tell my clients, the first thing an officer does is Google them.
Yeah, who are
They
they?
Google them, they
Exactly.
Google the employer, and they check it out. And if when they're making you wait in secondary inspection, if you're at the border, or when you're dealing with a consulate officer, I guarantee you they're going into Google and punching in. If your client doesn't come up on top, if you got to shift pages, that's not a no.
You need to
That's
go
not a
back.
no. As simple
Exactly.
as that, okay?
Yeah. But we agree with you, Veronique. I don't think I mean, they're gonna touch anything on the O1. We actually saw the policy update recently, right? And they were even talking about certain topics where they mentioned people raising capital and having startups and being the founder, and that fitting into the O1 as well. So we don't see it going anywhere and being. I mean, you never know, right? But we agree with you on that for sure.
So, we don't have so many huge artists and performers and O's coming out of Canada. Maybe we will now because of the change in government. But I think it's still a very solid category if your client can qualify. I wouldn't be afraid of recommending an O. The TN is the last category that I guess I've already mentioned. You know, recommend use the TN as much as possible. It's still there. It's still valid. Be careful with those catch categories: computer systems analyst, management consultant. Those are still nasty, very scrutinized categories, even for Canadians. But other than that, the TN, as far as we know, is still good. Just start again, stay on top of things, watch it, start telling your clients ahead of time that we've noticed your TN is going to expire next year. Have you started giving thought of how you're going to renew? What if the TNs are no longer an option? And you're going to catch a lot of people, woo, like, really? Because we don't realize, like, people get very comfortable with systems. But I said it in 2017 at a talk in Ontario for the Ontario Bar Association, and I'll say it again, even more so now. Back then in 2017, Trump discussed scrapping NAFTA. And in the end, his administration revamped it substantially in terms of the tariffs. But this time, I can't say for sure it'll be scrapped, but nobody should be surprised if we wake up one morning and he signed an executive order stopping NAFTA.
Correct. Yeah, now more even than in 2017, right? Because we've seen the actions, short-term
Absolutely.
actions.
It's his last
It's important
chance.
to
It's
be
his
prepared.
last term.
Yes,
So he's
exactly.
got to go hard. Yeah. If he's going to make change. And if this non-communication and, I don't want to say rivalry, that's not the appropriate term, but if this difficulty with Canada right now and Mexico doesn't get resolved around the tariffs, I mean, this is something foreseeable, right? Keyword
Exactly.
for lawyers, foreseeable.
Okay, what other visas do you have, Veronique, as well?
The EB-5 cat is an interesting.
Yes, golden ticket.
So, uh, you know, this is an interesting one. Um, what can I say? So I had a client who was a couple clients who were very concerned about having their applications filed before the inauguration, before Trump came into office, because they were concerned that their visa, the rules around their visas might change after he's inaugurated. Boy, so yeah, that's how scared people are, and to some
Exactly.
degree, with a lot of reason.
Yeah.
I I think the EB-5 has a lot of problems with it. I think it's a difficult visa, um, and I think now with Trump's 5 million golden ticket visa, we're really getting a clear message. Okay, we're getting a clear message that he wants to see money pouring into the US. I mean, it couldn't be more clear in everything that he's doing. He
Yes.
wants money.
Hmm.
So your clients, our clients, not need to be aware of that. Even on the E2, okay, what has a substantial, you guys know this, substantial amount,
Exactly.
which is what the person has to invest. What does that look like, right? We've had it pretty well, pretty good. I don't know about you guys, but we've worked together. So
Yes.
you could and you can still now get by with a small investment. And I say small, everything's relative, but we've had cases come through with 50 to 100,000.
Exactly. Hmm.
A franchise, a mobile franchise, something that doesn't require a huge amount of capital as a startup to get going. And with technology today and remote work, there's that ability. Let's be careful going forward. Trump may find, I'm not giving a visa for 50 grand. What is that? So if he's
Exactly.
5 million, right? Let's start telling our clients, not only for an initial investment do we want you to have higher numbers, but when you renew, let's not forget the E2 is a non-immigrant visa. It has to get renewed. It can be renewed indefinitely, but you better get your business to work and bring in money, because by the time you get to your renewal, it might
Exactly.
be that any two needs a minimum investment of 250,000, or to show that the activities of the business are able to generate that. So
Exactly. We're talking business. That's it. Right?
Yeah.
And Veronique, I did a poll on my LinkedIn account. I was asking people if they thought that the 5 million golden visa was going to be something additional because of everything that needs to go through Congress before being approved. Do you think that would be the case? Would it be additional, or are you thinking he's going to replace what the EB-5 is right now?
I think it's a bottom line. I think with Trump, he's going to look at how much has the EB-5 brought into the country, how many of those immigrants are solid immigrants and have not gone out of status or abused their visa or left. How successful has the program been? He's a bottom line. He's a top executive. Boom. What's the bottom line?
Mhm.
And those numbers, I think, are going to drive his decision. My sense of it, and it's pure speculation, we don't know what goes into this man's head, but I think he may scrap the EB-5 because it's been a little bit subject to a little overuse and fraud. And
Mhm.
so my sense is it might be safer for him to call out a new visa with new terms requiring a
Mhm.
new amount that will be better curtailed against fraud. But taking, I want everyone to be, aware that that's my own gut, not necessarily reality. Anything could
Mhm.
happen.
Mhm.
And the B5, if it shows, on the balance, good investments in the US and very, little, at the end of the day, has there been an abuse of this visa? If those numbers are properly presented, he may keep it.
Mhm. Exactly. My only concern there is that the profile of clients is different, right? You may have the EB-5 current applicants with a certain net worth, but then for you to get a golden visa, you need to have a lot of money, and that's not a high percentage, perhaps, of those current EB-5 applicants. So there's going to be a gap there. Where are those going to go, right? So then all these questions start to happen. And it's a different profile than the ones that are doing E2. I mean, because it doesn't lead you to a green card, etc. But yeah, a lot happening with all these visa options, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, and a little clarity. But again, I think that lawyers just have to position themselves for the inevitable or the unimaginable and be ready. We need to come out of our stupor right now. There's been a big wake up call with this new administration on so many levels. The world is in a rapid state of change, and lawyers are very traditional. We're bound by precedent. We don't adapt to change as quickly and so well. It's typical of lawyers, and studies have proven this. We're a very conservative profession. So
Yes.
that means that when we're dealing with something like this new administration that is not a lawyer, we are dealing with something that's really like, we're deer in the headlights a little bit.
Yeah, everybody's
And
overwhelmed.
everyone's
Too many
overwhelmed.
decisions at once, right?
100%. And uncertainty. Unknown is the worst part. The
Exactly.
gift of clarity, when whatever happens comes down and it's clear, you can relax and you can then send out your newsletter and say, this is a new, but really behind the scenes, we need to prepare our clients. And that's,
Hmm.
in my opinion, the difference between a good lawyer and a lawyer who's really just more of a paper pusher.
Hmm.
A good lawyer cares and is going to say to their clients, by the way, guys, lots of changes happening. We're available if you have questions. A lot of it's
Exactly.
speculation. We don't know, but we're here for you and feel free to book a meeting to discuss
Exactly.
if you like.
And here are your options, your possible options of every scenario that could happen. You were mentioning hesitation from clients before. On the EB-5, on our end, what we've seen is that people want to move quickly before those changes happen if they were thinking of applying to the EB-5. So there we are sensing some urgency for sure. I don't know if you've seen that as well, Veronique.
Happens to be we don't handle EB-5s. I send them out. So, but I have seen more inquiries coming in. So I'm not surprised by what you're saying. Um,
Exactly.
yeah.
Wonderful. You were mentioning employment based visas. Can we talk a little bit about the EB-2 NIW as an option?
Sure. So to NIW is a nice option for Canadians because it is not based on an employment an offer of employment, it's really based on the merit of the applicant. And it's one of the very few, we talked about this in opening, very few categories of green card possibilities in the US that is not employment dependent. So again, with the new flavor of this current administration in the US, I think it's very important for Canadians who have exceptional abilities or advanced degrees to also make sure, if they're going to do an EB-2 national interest waiver, that they have a presence online, that they have accomplishments that they can track. I would say that the level of scrutiny for that visa category is probably going to increase because there will be more applicants, and therefore they're going to raise the bar in terms of what is an exceptional
Exactly.
ability, right? So we have to be careful about that and warn our clients. Um, I still think it's a good visa right now. I think for Canadians especially, it's a nice opportunity to go in, and you might already be, you might have a client who's already in the US on a TN, for example, which is a immigrant visa. You might want to counsel them to consider that green card route now while it's still available, because again, maybe one morning Trump will wake up and say, no, I want all green cards to be employer dependent, and scrap that category.
Oh my God, I'm praying that that doesn't happen for sure. But yeah, like you say, Veronique, anything is possible right now. So if you have the option to prepare, definitely do it. And on the EB2 NIW, we're seeing uh, um, approval rates were 90%. That was before in 2022, 2023, and then they dropped to 80%. That's where we saw them. And then you have the STEM applicants, the non-STEM applicants, and the scrutiny on the non-STEM applicants is seen to be also higher. So we're
Right.
seeing those numbers. And on what's related to us for the business plans, we're seeing people are going to be more eager to include that business plan whenever relevant, of course, in the initial filing instead of maybe waiting for the RFE. So, and I think the scrutiny in general, everybody must expect that it's going to go up in any visa type, in any application, right? So that's definitely something that's happening across the board for sure.
Well, yeah, it's a good point you make, and the scrutiny is going to go up across the board. I think in this visa category, demonstrating the national interest is going to become a bigger piece of the application. We have something similar in Canada with the C10, which is significant interest Canadian benefits, significant benefit Canadian interest, sorry. That category, similar. Let me tell you, for Canada, it doesn't take much to reach that level, okay? I had a call many years ago, you will laugh, but from a border officer. I'll never forget it. Saying, I have somebody coming into my port. This is the Montreal crossing, Saint-Bernard-la-Colle. And rarely do we get calls from officers, but she said, it's a C10 and I have a few questions for you. I said, sure. I said, madame, I have to tell you, normally I see C10s, and it's my accent also. It's for somebody like Celine Dion.
Oh my God, seriously?
That's what she said to me, this officer. And I never forgot it because I was like, whoa, that's such a high level to
Exactly.
me. They let my client in. I assure you she was not Celine Dion, so it was fine. But what it said to me back then is what officers are thinking, right? And then
Yes.
the value to that is immense. When you
Yes.
realize that these officers are told, significant interests, significant benefits, sorry, Canadian interests, it's got to be somebody big. Like,
Exactly.
you have to think about that. You have to think
Yeah.
about that, and it's not what well, I think my person's so big. It's not about that. They're looking at that very high threshold. So conversely, in the US, when we're going to be doing national interest waivers, we have to really think about how to demonstrate what the impact will be on the nation. So
Yes.
going back to your example of STEM folks, with AI now, that is, in my opinion, what the U.S. is going to want to see. We have IT
Exactly.
workers. IT has now become a very commonplace. So
Hmm.
the scrutiny is going to go up, and it's always gone up with IT workers, right? It used to be C++ was something okay. Now it's like
Exactly.
C++ does not make you an outstanding ability or exceptional ability anymore. Then
Exactly.
that's gone up as obviously as technology has
Yeah.
developed. But I would say in STEM, if I would say to my client, I had one recently, AI, how does your work involve AI and what are you doing with that?
Yes.
And so if you have a client that says, actually, and I did have one, I'm in charge in my company to bring all the IT workers to the next level with AI. I said, now we're talking. Tell
Exactly.
me
That's an impact.
right. That's it. Well, it is and it isn't, right? So that's what he's doing. But how then take it the next level? How is what you're teaching the crew going
Hmm.
to impact greater good of the nation?
Exactly. On a
What
nationwide level.
business
Yes.
is it going to help attract? Remember, think like Trump, think business. What business, how much money can it generate? At the end of the day, it's the US. It's not a philosophy of quality, it's a philosophy of quantity now more than ever.
Exactly. Definitely. No, and on the policy update of the EB-2 NIW, we're also seeing, right? And they're mentioning AI, emerging technologies, oil and gas. So they've shifted a little bit from previous fields that they seem to be moving towards now. So
Yep.
that's one part of it. But definitely, I definitely agree that national importance is very big right now. It's still a little bit subjective depending on the officer that reviews your file, but the more you add as an argument, as evidence, etc., the more you minimize that subjectivity, right? To
Right.
make sure that that's definitely an option for whoever is the applicant at the time. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of options, right? We've mentioned many of them. How do you see the U.S. seeing Canadian business ventures into the U.S. like in the light of USCIS? Do you see that still as being positive, or how do you see that?
I think that the Canadians have an advantage when it comes to applications into the US. First of all, English being one of the official languages of Canada, you
And the
have
U.S. now.
in the US, right? So you have no language barrier there. And that's a very clear factor that determines the success of an entrepreneur in the US or in Canada for that matter. It's a very well documented that to do well, you should be able to navigate well in the English language if you're in an English country. It's almost common sense, right? But that places Canadians at an advantage over other countries that might not have English as their first language. Okay.
Mhm.
Also, proximity and cultural similarity. So, USCIS officers, in my experience, are not concerned about the integration as much of a Canadian in the US. That's not going to pose a barrier. But if you're coming from a far country, and especially if you've not been in the US before, and I don't recommend making an application without having your applicant make a pilot trip to the US, okay?
Mhm.
But say that that person has come in and they have little experience with North America, that's definitely going to impact the application. So, Canada, you're already in North America. So, you're already there.
Exactly.
And most Canadians have been to the US. I don't know what the statistic is on that, but I'd be shocked to find a Canadian adult that has not
Yeah.
once been to the US. There are, I'm sure, but most people live within 200 kilometers of the
Yeah.
US border, right? So there's
Exactly.
always been that trade. And I think that Canadians are at a real advantage with that.
Yes, I agree. And also you were mentioning about the E2 investments. They used to be, or they are currently small amounts depending on the business type. And I think it's more flexible for Canadians than maybe other countries. Of course, no statistics on that, but what we've seen is that other countries are more eager to make their cases more solid and play it safe, right? but
Yes.
now Canada maybe has to do a little bit of that as well. But I agree with you, Veronique, that Canada, I mean, it has been prioritized
Oh,
as
yeah.
a country of like where immigrants are coming into the U.S. for sure, for sure.
Sure. Absolutely.
Veronique, and we have a few minutes, and I have a couple of questions more. So I wanted to ask you maybe some examples that you can mention of successful Canadian applicants who got U.S. visa, to name a few.
All right. So
You
loaded.
probably have many, no?
Well, obviously I can't discuss my own clients, but I'll discuss a client or somebody's client out there who is well known, and to bring a little bit more humor to this conversation. But Elon Musk has a Canadian
Ooh.
citizenship, and Elon Musk, we all know, is now in the U.S. So I'm not quite sure if he went in on an F1. He did study in the U.S. If he was on an F or an E2. Okay, so somebody out there will know this, but and feel free to write to me because I'd love to know a little more. I tried to find it and I couldn't, but so you could see that obviously the U.S. is going to welcome Canadian citizens just by
Yes,
that example alone.
for sure. For sure. I think it was Greg Siskin that shared an article about it, that they were saying that he had an F1, but they were questioning as to whether he has worked while having an F1. So it became all this issue because his brother said, "I don't know what visa we had, but we were
Right,
already working." And then they
right.
were saying, "Oh my God, he was breaking all these laws or something."
Right, and in the
So
meantime,
yeah.
the Canadians are looking to see if they can revoke his citizenship for Canada because of his lack
Yeah.
of apparent lack of patriotism.
Yeah.
Calling Canada the 51st state and so on. But that is not a possibility. If you're interested in that, there's definitely an answer
Okay.
to that. He cannot lose his Canadian citizenship.
Okay, okay, good to know, good to know. And Veronique, so to wrap up, what advice can you give immigration professionals planning to offer U.S. options for Canadians?
So my advice would be stay on top of developments, and that doesn't mean the news. The news is very slanted and uninformed. Oftentimes, they're after the fact. So you want to be ahead of the game. You want to be involved in forums or summits like this one. You want to be involved in as many listservs for your area as possible through AILA or through the Canadian Bar Association. You want to have reach out to your colleagues and say, what are you guys thinking? This is a time to go to these conferences that they offer. All these conferences, we have one at AILA Denver coming up. It's important to go. In the past, we've kind of been watching them online. We've been, this is the time. We have to be right then and there in the heat of the fire. You're going to meet AILA, people from AILA. You're going to meet people from USCIS. You're going to meet people from ICE. There's nothing like, and when I go to the Canadian ones, I run after the IRCC officers to do their panels. I go to them at the end. I said, no, 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 no. I need to know what's going on. And, you need to, this is your chance. So I would say definitely this year, more than any year, to really make the effort to attend these events and to really network with your peers. Don't feel like I'm afraid, I don't know, I'm worried about my practice, and that's fair. That's fair. We need to worry. We've invested a lot in our jobs, our careers. What's going to happen? Being in fear is a very difficult place to be. We don't want to be there. We want to be proactive. We're all in this together. We're all in this together, or have to do the same thing together to help people come into the country legally. And that's Canada or the US. So remembering that, and don't think you're behind the eight ball. We're all behind the eight ball. We don't know what's happening. Okay, no matter how experienced, whether it's Greg Siskiner, me, or anyone else, we don't know what's going to be. So we're in this uncertain place, and hopefully we will get a little more clarity as we go along, but stay prepared and ahead of the game. That would be my best advice.
Okay, so stay informed, be proactive, and I mean that's basically. I mean, go back to the drawing board with your client, but be there for them. Do a lot of networking so that you're on top of everything that's happening. Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you so much, Veronique, for all the valuable knowledge that you shared today. I couldn't imagine somebody like knowing so much about what's happening on the US side, on the Canadian side, and so many insightful information that you provided to our audience today. Thank you so much for being here, Veronique.
Thank you, Marianella, for this summit, because I think this is one of the true ways that people can be involved and communicate and join in and pull together. So this, I think this is a wonderful event that you put together. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It means a lot to us,
Of
Veronique. Thank
course.
you for accepting our invitation.
Of course. Good luck with everything. We'll be in touch.